ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do!
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas Month. So, today's episode, Junk in the Trunk, is fun in that, Coop kind of breaks an important part that Megas needs and has to go find a spare part on a junk planet. That's basically what the episode is. But, in case the episode actually does open up with Coop actually breaking said part, so it actually starts off with Coop just kind of putting Megas through spaces to try and make sure that all of the modifications he's put into it are working in a proper order, and in order to test those, he's actually hanging out in Goat's junkyard with Megas and Coop with Megas, as well as with Jamie riding shotgun, and of course you've got Goat who's helping out as well with the various pieces of construction equipment that he has, and sure enough, he's just kind of doing a bit of a field test. He tests out its swinging by hitting a wrecking ball off of its chain, and also gets into an arm wrestling match with Goat's. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's some sort of piece of equipment that Goat's trying to use to actually kind of arm wrestle him with. I don't know the actual term, but in case where the part actually winds up breaking is when Coop is actually using Megas to bench press several buses, and according to Goat, it's lifting 50 tons, but Coop then points out that he then suggests that they add more weight, which Goat immediately suggests against, pointing out that once again they're lifting well over 50 tons, and he doesn't want to stress out Megas, but of course Jamie immediately suggests that Megas can take it, and so on goes another bus. But even though Goat admits that he doesn't really feel like doing that, but he does it because he trusts Jamie and Coop's judgment, and that winds up being a mistake, because sure enough, it winds up being too much for Megas to handle, and it winds up breaking Megas's Photonic Stabilizer, which winds up having this big alert on the screen, and Coop immediately realizes he needs to put the weight down, and does exactly that, and then Jamie does a full 180 and suggests that Coop probably shouldn't have lifted too much, and told Coop that Megas couldn't handle it. So yeah, even though it was his fault that the Photonic Stabilizer technically broke, because he was the one who goaded Coop and Goat on to put more weight on, ultimately he just kind of decides to just immediately go full 180 and decides to actually just throw that away. And of course, Kiva isn't particularly happy when she finds out that they actually broke the Photonic Stabilizer, and when Coop points out that it'll be he put Megas under a little bit too much stress, he does point out that he can fix it, but of course Kiva points out that it isn't one of those things that you can fix, and that it actually needs to be replaced outright, and does proceed to point out that unfortunately it's going to be very difficult to replace, because it is a part from the future, and it's and for obvious reasons it's very difficult to actually replace it, and of course it's at this point where Jamie remembers that they were actually going around joyriding in Megas, and remarks that they've actually been to a place where they can actually go to possibly replace the Photonic Stabilizer, and of course Coop, because Jamie plays a bit of a pronoun game, Coop immediately assumes that he was talking about that arena thing that they went to, and sure enough, it's like there's just these two little guys, there's just this planet full of little guys that are just jousting each other, and it's kind of fun, but then Jamie corrects him, pointing out that what he was actually referring to was a giant junk planet, and this causes Goat's ears to perk up, and of course, Kiva points out the very obvious thing, that they found a giant junk planet without telling her, and Goat also reiterates that sentiment, since obviously he's a junkhead. He likes his spare parts and stuff. So of course he's going to be a little bit miffed at the fact that Coop and Jamie didn't tell them. But of course Coop points out that they didn't think Kiva would be interested. So of course they decided not to tell her. But then Kiva winds up scratching her head for a minute, and she eventually realizes that if they do indeed go to the junk planet, they will possibly find some sort of some sort of replacement for the photonic stabilizer that they could possibly use. Not necessarily a photonic stabilizer per se, but something that they could retrofit to fit Megas and fix. So of course she immediately jumps at the opportunity to actually go to the junk planet with Coop and Jamie, and decides that yeah, it might be a good idea to go to this junk planet and check it out. And it's at this point where Goat actually volunteers to come along, and also starts flirting with Kiva, trying to pick her up and point out that he very much wants that she's very much likely going to need somebody to actually go and take them to go and show them around the junk planet, since he's the kind of guy who knows this kind of stuff. And also suggests that he may one day actually find a robot of his own. And sure enough, we actually see a bit of a fantasy where he has a giant robot that looks like a woman, and that he lovingly calls Darlene. And basically it just shows him helping out various attractive young women to basically just kind of pick them up and make them fall in love with him, like and just the standard generic stuff that you would expect somebody to help with. But just saving a balloon for their crying kid, helping them cross the street, and saving their dog from a tree, that kind of stuff. And upon hearing all these fantasies, Kiva immediately runs over to Jamie and Coop and asks if she can sit in the front seat just this once. But Jamie, either because he doesn't care or because he knows Kiva's most likely going to have a very uncomfortable ride, decides to call shotgun, even though he knows very well that Kiva called it first. And of course, Coop just kind of goes along with it because he's too oblivious to figure out why Kiva wants to actually sit up front. And sure enough, all four of them then proceed to pile into Megas and go flying off to go to the junk planet. And of course, it winds up being as awkward for Kiva as you would expect, because she's sharing a backseat with Goat, and Goat can't keep his hands off her and won't stop flirting with her. So of course she becomes increasingly annoyed with him, and eventually just kind of zeroes in on her work, and does eventually start putting a read on the planet to actually try and figure out what exactly it is that they're looking for. And sure enough, she can't find anything at first, but when they do eventually land on the junk planet, but Coop just points out that they'll likely just have to look around and try and find whatever they're looking for. And they don't really have much time to do it, because immediately after they arrive on the planet, they're attacked by some giant space worm thing, which doesn't have a picture on the wiki apparently. And I've said this, but there are a couple of things here that aren't fully complete. For example, there are a couple of images that I couldn't find at all. And sure enough, this giant space worm thing is one of them. And it immediately tries to eat Megas, and Coop prepares to actually go in and fight, but and of course Kiva immediately tells him not to, pointing out that the photonic stabilizer is obviously a mess, and they obviously shouldn't do something like that. But Coop either ignores her or isn't paying attention to her, because he winds up fighting the giant space worm pretty effortlessly, might I add. He just quickly defeats it, and is able to effectively just take it down and a peg or two and knock it out. And even though Kiva points out that put a lot of unnecessary strain on the photonic stabilizer, but Coop just remarks that he handled it, and now they have free run of the place to actually explore. But then they're immediately eaten by the giant space worm until its owner actually calls it off, and it spits them out. And sure enough, we meet an alien named Varson, who is very redneck-like, and he does indeed reveal that not only is the worm his pet, its name is apparently Fred, and he later volunteers to put it back on his leash so that it doesn't scare them again and try to eat them again. He then introduces himself and points out that he owns the junk planet, and gets a good and decides to get a good look at them, and sure enough immediately tries to buy Megas, because he points out that he could possibly make something out of it. And although they do immediately point out that it's not for sale, and of course Kiva does point out that they're actually looking for a new photonic stabilizer and asks if he has anything like that. And of course Varson immediately points out that he'd be more than happy to show them around, because of course there's a very good chance that whatever part they need is just kind of lying around on the planet somewhere, and proceeds to drive around in his little buggy thing that he uses to get around. It's the giant tank tread thing that has a bit of one of those, what is it? It's one of those bucket trucks, basically. basically it's just a junk version of one of those an alien junk version of one of those bucket trucks that you see. And yeah, his cabin is on the end of that, and he can just retract it and stick it back up as needed. But in case he drives it through the junk while Coop follows up along the Megas, and of course Jamie immediately suggests that the guy is creepier than Goat, which Goat agrees to until he realizes that Jamie just insulted him to his face and isn't particularly pleased about that, which is just really funny. But in case they do eventually arrive at the center of Varson's operation, where he reveals that what he actually does is that he actually has a bit of a scrapping operation where he will take things, break them down, and then melt them down to make new stuff so that he can resell it. And of course, Kiva of course they do immediately point out that that is very nice. Although Coop looks a little bit nervously at the end of it, because there's just a vat of acid that the stuff is just dumped into to melt it down so it can be used as sold as scrap. But of course he's very nervous because he's very worried about Megas falling in or something like that. But of course, Kiva wonders if he does indeed have the part they need, pointing out that it would have to be around 1,000 years from the future, give or take. And Varson points out that he may or may not have something like that, but does also point out that because it's a very big planet and he generally just knows that he has a lot of different things, but doesn't really know where something is, when it arrives, or even if he has it. So yeah, he just points out that whatever they have, they're going to absolutely just look around and take a look for it. So of course the group quickly realizes that they're going to need to split up and figure out where they're supposed to go. And of course Jamie immediately volunteers to try and go and ride Coop, but he tries to ride shotgun again, but Kiva shuts him down immediately, and also immediately dumps Goat on Jamie the first chance she gets, because of course, Goat has been flirting with her nonstop throughout this episode. She's really not okay with it. She kind of just doesn't like him. And to be fair, he is a bit of a sleazy junkyard owner, so that makes perfect sense. But yeah, she's not particularly happy. She doesn't particularly happy with the fact that he flirts with her all the time. So yeah, he immediately partners him and Jamie up, and while she and Coop ride around to Megas to try and find some stuff. And of course Jamie protests, pointing out that he would like to ride around the giant robot, but of course, Kiva points out the very obvious problem with that, and that Megas is actually the least safe place around, pointing out that the Photonic Stabilizer will blow up, that if the Photonic Stabilizer blows up, it'll take everything with it, and yeah, that is a thing she brings up multiple times, that if the Photonic Stabilizer basically, I haven't brought this up because I'm bad at retelling things, but basically at the start of the episode, she's like, yeah, if the Photonic Stabilizer blows up, it's going to take everything within 100 miles with it, so yeah, of course. So yeah, they kind of need to replace that part, or bad things will happen. But and of course, Jamie concedes, pointing out that it probably is safer with Goat than in the giant robot, and he and Goat stumble off to go find something. Although the two of them later admit that they don't really know what they're looking for, mainly because Goat doesn't know what a Photonic Stabilizer is, and Jamie is not a trash guy, so he has no idea if what Goat's looking for is even the thing they're supposed to be finding. And meanwhile, Kiva piles back into Megas, and the two of them proceed to ride off to go and find a new Photonic Stabilizer. Unaware that Varson is actually scanning the robot to actually try and figure out what kind of parts they have. And when he finds out that they actually have a time drive, he realizes that he can now finally finish his masterpiece, and declares that he's going to get his hands on it no matter what. So yeah, Varson is revealed in this moment to actually be our bad guy. He's just trying to build it. We do eventually see it, but he is trying to build this giant masterpiece thing that he's trying to put together, and that does eventually wind up bearing fruit. But in any case, as I said, Jamie and Goat are just kind of stumbling around the junkyard planet, and they have no idea what they're looking for. Again, because Goat doesn't know what they're looking for, and Jamie is is just kind of trusting Goat's judgment, which just winds up being a bad idea. So yeah, of course, because neither of them know what they're looking for, that winds up being a problem. But eventually, Goat does find something that he thinks is a Photonic Stabilizer and picks it up, only to discover that's too heavy. So he picks up something next to it, and Jamie just decides that's good enough, and they decide to walk off. But then the thing that Goat was trying to move moves on its own, and sure enough, what we find out is that the the place where they decide to actually go and investigate for a new photonic stabilizer is a long story short, just giant junkyard robots. I'm not gonna picture them, mainly because I couldn't find a picture for them. But basically, the giant robots, these giant robots are barely functioning, and they are just a mess. They are just broken. They're just broken into pieces. They're barely holding together, but they're still operational enough to actually chase after Goat and Jamie. And of course, the two of them immediately try to flee. At one point, climbing a cliff and falling down a chute to try and get away from them. And they do eventually manage to kind of get away from the robots. But it does wind up being a problem for Coop and Kiva later, because of course Coop and Kiva are currently looking for a photonic stabilizer on their own, and they're not having much luck. Kiva is trying to use her sci-fi laptop thing that she should just pull out of nowhere because she's from the future, but of course she's constantly searching for a new one, and she can't find it, and concludes that if there is indeed a photonic stabilizer on the planet that they can use and recycle, it's very particularly hard to find. And but of course, as they're actually looking, the shadow suddenly looms over the robot, and of course, this is as Coop is actually remarking that Varson was a little bit creepy. And sure enough, they turn around and discover that Varson has actually showed up in a giant crane, and he then proceeds to reveal his evil plan to Coop and Kiva, and of course Coop just kind of looks at him a little bit funny as he's explaining his evil plan, and of course what we do find out is that his evil plan is complete and utter nonsense and complete and utter bullshit. It's basically what Varson points out that he wants their time drive, which Kiva immediately points out is broken, and and Varson admits that he can fix anything, but and claims that he will actually be able to fix the time drive, and also there's a really funny thing where Kiva once again remarks that Coop broke their time drive, and he apologizes for that again, but Varson points out that once he's actually salvaged the time drive and actually plans to fix it, basically his plan is to just plunder the galaxy for trash, then use his time drive to do it again, which of course doesn't really add up, because he thinks that that'll enable him to actually collect everything twice, even though that's not how that works. Basically he's just going to go back in time. He's going to collect everything once, go back in time, collect everything again. And somehow he thinks that's going to make two of everything, even though that's not how time travel works. Basically, he's just going to go back in time and just recollect everything that he already has, and thereby erasing the timeline where he's already collected it. So yeah, basically, time travel is complicated, and I don't think Varson understands that. And to be fair, he's a bit of a redneck, but which tracks. But yeah, it's clear that Varson's an idiot and hasn't completely thought any of this through. But in case Coop then points out that he's not going to let them get their time drive, and Varson points out that as long as they don't move, that he won't have to smash them up too bad. And of course, Coop immediately goes to fight, but then Kiva points out that they need to watch the temp, and that if he isn't careful, they could very well blow up the photonic stabilizer and take everything with it. So of course, Coop quickly realizes that he's not going to be able to fight back against Varson, and of course instead baits Varson into an attack where he drops his little crane to try and scoop up Coop, but Coop just winds up grabbing it and breaking the arm off, and Varson, undeterred by this, then summons several more junkyard robots, which are all just various repurposed pieces of construction equipment, and sends them to go and try and scrap up Coop and his robot, and Coop quickly realizes that he's going to need to fight, and even though Kiva tells him not to, and starts dealing with the giant robots as efficiently as he can, so that he can actually keep the photonic stabilizer from blowing up, and of course in the process, this actually results in in Jamie and Goat actually eventually returning, and they have all of the evil junkyard robots in tow, and of course Goat immediately remarks that he'll actually distract them so that Jamie can get away and get back to Megas, but of course this doesn't wind up working, And Goat immediately realizes he needs a different plan, and then we find out why. As it turns out, they're under direct control of Varson, and he commands that they actually grab Coop's giant robot and tear it to pieces so that he can get their time drive. And of course, the Coop then proceeds to actually fight off the junkyard robots, making very sure to be careful about the fact that he doesn't break anything. And of course, Kiva even once again points out that they can't fight, and of course, Coop then points out the very obvious problem in that he's stuck in a catch-22 situation. Either he doesn't fight and gets scrapped by the junkyard robots, or he does fight and blows everybody up. And eventually he opts for the latter option, where he decides it's probably better to blow up than be killed. So he decides that at least they'll go down swinging. So he immediately does exactly that and starts fighting off the robots. And at one point he actually winds up knocking one of the robots into a vat of acid, which causes all the junk around it to actually flood. And of course Coop immediately has to get to safety with Megas and everybody in tow, whereas Varson and his crane are unable to actually escape, and Varson quickly realizes that he'll have to switch to his plan B and runs off to leaving the crane to be soaked into the acid. And Coop then points out that seems to have taken care of that situation, but then Kiva notices that she's actually found a read on the part that they need, the Photonic Stabilizer, and discovers that for whatever reason it seems to be getting closer to them. And Coop initially assumes that's good, until the ground starts shaking and he realizes it's probably not good. And sure enough, it's at this point where Varson actually shows up in his quote-unquote masterpiece called the Franken, which true to its name is just a series of it's a giant robot made out of junk. But it's this giant robot made out of junk, various pieces of construction equipment, and it's massive. It is huge. And of course, Varson decides that he's done playing around, and once again demands that Coop hand over his time drive. But Coop says they'll have to scrap him first, and of course Jamie, who has since rejoined them, points out that he doesn't want any part of that, and points out that Coop isn't speaking for him. But Varson points out he was gonna crush him anyway, and immediately goes into fight against Coop, and Coop is kind of fighting an uphill battle, mainly because his Photonic Stabilizer is all sorts of messed up, but also because Varson's robot is just too powerful, and he can't actually successfully beat it. But of course, eventually Varson is able to actually defeat Megas, and winds up scooping it up and putting it on a conveyor belt and strapping it down so that he can actually cut it open to see what's inside. And as he's about to do that, it's at this point where Goat actually returns and declares that he's here to save his friends. And Coop even points out that this is a very heroic moment for him, pointing out that Goat has come to the rescue. And sure enough, Goat shows up. But what we find out is that in the time he was gone, he actually managed to scrape together enough spare parts to make his own giant robot which again he finally mates Darlene, and we finally see her. And well, she doesn't look exactly like she does in the fantasy, like at all, because obviously she's made out of junkyard parts. But Goat is very much proud of her, and does point out that Varson isn't the only one who knows his way around a junk pile, and declares that now he and him are going to face off. But then we find out that in a combination of the fact that Darlene is barely being held together, and the fact that Goat isn't really the best mech pilot at all, Darlene immediately falls apart with Goat in it, and he just winds up falling down a cliffside and into the place where they're falling. And of course, Varson points out that was probably the most pathetic display of fighting that he's ever seen. But at which point Coop remarks that maybe he'll like this better then. And then there's just a button that says "this better then," and then he presses it and launches Megas' fist with axes sticking out of it, and just kind of smashes his way into Franken, and plucks his Photonic Stabilizer, which he then tries to insert back into Megas, and winds up, and of course it doesn't quite fit. But Coop is determined to reinsert the part inside of Megas, and opens up the little hatch on it, which he does start shoving it in. But in the process, the Franken winds up hitting him, and he winds up breaking it. And of course, Kiva points out the very obvious problem in that was probably the only photonic stabilizer they have anywhere. And of course, because of this, it's at this point where Megas finally starts going critical, and is very much in danger of blowing up. And Coop decides to, and Coop finally realizing that he's not going to be able to fix the part, replace the part the normal way, decides to go down and fix it best he can. So he immediately leaves, and it starts to go critical in like the 5 seconds he's gone, but then it suddenly stops, and Coop returns, pointing out that he took care of it, and of course Kiva's very confused, asking him what exactly it was he did, but he doesn't really give a clear answer, or at least right away, and now with his photonic stabilizer apparently fixed with no clear explanation, he's then able to actually finally fight at full capacity and is able to actually take down Varson no problem. And of course, Coop immediately points out that takes care of that. But then Jamie asks the very obvious problem: is that if Megas broke his photonic stabilizer, then what's currently keeping the Franken from actually blowing up itself? And of course, Coop immediately realizes that the Franken is now going critical from all the strain that Coop caused it to go through, and immediately scoops up Goat from his wreckage, who kind of bemoans the fact that he has to leave behind Darlene, but of course the four of them immediately leave in Megas with Jamie pointing out that they're likely not going to make it, and Kiva keeping track of how close they are, so that they know when they've actually escaped the explosion range, and of course Varson, and the last thing we see of Varson is he pokes his head out of the Franken, pointing at, and notices that his robot is going critical, and the last words he ever says is, "I can fix this." And then immediately he and his planet blow up, and of course this causes his entire planet to go up because as we've established, photonic stabilizer, if it's not kept stable, it will take out anything within 100 miles, and that happens to be the exact width of the junk planet. So yeah, because of that, the entire junk planet is just kind of lost. And of course Darlene, and of course Goat then proceeds to have a bit of a eulogy for Darlene, pointing out that she will be missed, but will be in a better place. While Kiva then asks Coop how he managed to replace the photonic stabilizer, even though they broke the only one they could replace. And Coop then pulls out a roll of duct tape and reveals that, and just says, "When in doubt, duck it." So, and of course, what we find out is that Coop just kind of took a roll of duct tape and just wrapped it around the photonic stabilizer, and that fixed it enough. So yeah, of course this winds up fixing it permanently, because obviously the photonic stabilizer never winds up being a problem again. But and of course Kiva is just very marveling at this piece of primitive technology that was somehow able to fix a part that she said couldn't be fixed. So, and of course Coop kind of takes a minute to pat himself on the back, pointing out the very obvious that he managed to fix an unfixable part. But it's at this point where Goat once again puts his arm around Kiva and remarks that that's kind of good that Darlene isn't around anymore, because he then proceeds to make several very sexist remarks about how women are high maintenance and ultimately not worth the effort to actually kind of maintain. And of course this finally pushes Kiva past her breaking point, and we just see a cutaway where she has actually duct taped Goat up and has taped his mouth shut, and of course Coop sarcastically remarks if he's comfortable back there, and Kiva then remarks back, "When in doubt, duck it." And the three of them share to laugh as Goat kind of struggles and his bonds a little bit, and then they fly back home. And then at the final end of the episode, at the end credits, you remember Tobin and Florkson from All He Wanted Was a Slushie? Yeah, those guys show up and they clean up what's left of the junk planet in their ship. They show up, they show up in spacesuits, and they just kind of scoop up all of the junk, all of the free-floating junks that it's implied that they'll eventually salvage. And then they just kind of fly off with their newfound haul. So yeah, it is fun that so apparently they're just kind of like the janitors of the universe. They just kind of go around and clean up anybody's messes and just kind of scoop up any prison transports or anything. But it is fun that they're just around. So yeah, of course this episode just kind of is just kind of fun, and that's they spend a lot of the episode going around being about how there's this unfixable part that they need to replace. They go to a junk plant to find a piece, wind up getting into a fight with the junkyard owner because he wants something they have that also can't be fixed. And in the end, they don't even replace the part. They just duct tape it shut and it's fine. And I do kind of like how funny that is. It's just hilarious. And it makes perfect sense for the series. It makes perfect sense that would be a thing that they would do. Where they just like set up this thing that is obviously this plot device that they're going to need for the episode, and then they just deliberately don't follow through on that. They just set it up. They just set it up as an idea. And it's like, oh no, never mind. We can just fix the part ourselves. It's fine. We don't need no stinking replacement. But and I do kind of like how funny that is. But in any case, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And also, be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is actually the previous one of these that I did, Courage Month. So if you want to absolutely see the first one of these that I did, go ahead. Link is down in the description. Go check that one out. And yeah, just go check that out. And just check that out. Go watch that. And yeah, I hope you guys will enjoy that because a lot of people have. But go check that out. Again, just link is down. Link is on the end screen. Just go check it out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.